the worst moment of my marriage happened, while everyone was holding champagne glasses and smiling for photos. It was our 10th wedding anniversary. My husband stood on stage at the restaurant we'd rented out, microphone in hand, telling a story about how lucky he'd been in business. Then he laughed. Not a warm laugh. The kind people use when they're about to embarrass someone. He pointed at me sitting near the front table and said, "Honestly, Emily deserves an award too. She's been my assistant for 10 years at home and at work." The room laughed. Loud, comfortable laughter. Like this wasn't surprising. Like they'd heard jokes like this before. I felt my face burn, while people turned toward me with polite sympathy smiles. Assistant. Not wife. Not partner. Not the woman who helped build everything he had. And in that exact moment, something clicked. Because I realized two things at once. First, my husband wasn't joking. And second, I had his voice recorded saying something he never expected anyone else to hear. What confused me wasn't just the joke. It was how comfortable everyone looked. His coworkers nodded like this was normal. One woman at his office table avoided eye contact with me completely. Another whispered something and covered her mouth. That's when I understood. I might have been the only person in that room who didn't know who my husband really was. For months, little things had felt off. Late meetings. Private phone calls. A sudden need to keep finances organized without my help. And a conversation I accidentally recorded weeks earlier, one I almost deleted because I thought it meant nothing. Until that night. Until the humiliation. Until I realized our anniversary party wasn't meant to celebrate us. It was meant to rewrite me out of his story. What my husband didn't know was that I had already stopped trusting him. And I had come prepared. Before I tell you what happened next, consider subscribing to Marrianne Tales if stories about real relationships, betrayal, and real emotional comebacks mean something to you. And tell me where you're watching from and what time is it. I always read the comments. Now let's go back to how my marriage actually looked before that night. Because from the outside, we looked perfect. When I met Daniel, I was 26 and working 2 jobs. One at a marketing agency during the day. Another doing freelance bookkeeping at night because I had student loans and a stubborn belief that independence mattered more than comfort. Daniel walked into my life like certainty. Confident. Charming without trying too hard. He was starting a small logistics company then, just 3 employees and a rented office above a tire shop. On our 3rd date, he said something I still remember. "I don't want a traditional marriage. I want a partner, someone who builds with me." And I believed him. Because back then, he acted like he meant it. We spent nights sitting on our apartment floor eating takeout while reviewing spreadsheets together. I helped him organize contracts. I redesigned invoices. I handled payroll when his first employee almost quit over late payments. He used to kiss my forehead and say, "I couldn't do this without you." Those words mattered to me more than flowers or gifts. We married 2 years later. Small ceremony. Backyard reception. Nothing fancy, just friends, family, and the feeling that we were building something together. As his company grew, my role changed naturally. At least, that's what I thought. I left my agency job after Daniel suggested it. "It doesn't make sense for you to burn yourself out," he told me. "Work with me full-time, we'll grow faster." So I did. I managed vendor relationships, tracked expenses, handled hiring paperwork. I even trained his office manager when they expanded. But officially, I never had a title. Daniel always said paperwork could wait. "We're married, what's mine is yours." I trusted that completely. Our life improved quickly. Better apartment. Then a house. Vacations we used to dream about. People admired us. Friends called us the stable couple. And honestly, for years I felt happy. Daniel worked long hours. I stayed behind managing logistics, home life, and most of the invisible work that kept everything running. I didn't resent it. I thought we were dividing responsibilities. The first small change happened around year 8 of our marriage. It was subtle. Daniel stopped asking for my input. He'd make decisions first, then inform me afterward. I hired a new operations director. I opened another account. I restructured the management team. At first, I assumed he was just busy. Success changes pace. But conversations became shorter, more transactional. When I talked about my ideas, he'd nod without really listening. One night I joked, "Wow, Mr. CEO doesn't need me anymore." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course I do," he said. "You keep things running at home." At home. That phrasing lingered longer than it should have. Still, nothing felt serious enough to question. Until the anniversary planning started. Daniel insisted on organizing everything himself. That alone was unusual. I had planned every celebration before, birthdays, holidays, even his company launch parties. But this time he said, "I want to surprise you." He booked a high-end restaurant downtown. Invited his employees, business partners, and people I barely knew. "It's a celebration of everything we've built," he told me. I remember feeling proud. Loved. Seen. I bought a navy dress he once said made my eyes look brighter. I spent weeks looking forward to that night. Because I thought it would be a moment where he finally acknowledged us as equals again. I had no idea. I was walking into a completely different kind of event. 2 weeks before the anniversary, I noticed Daniel started taking calls outside. Not unusual at first. But one evening, he stepped onto the patio and lowered his voice. I wasn't trying to listen. I just happened to walk past the door when I heard him say, "No, she doesn't need to know yet." I froze. Silence followed. Then softer words I couldn't fully hear. When he came back inside, he smiled too quickly. "Client issue," he said. I nodded. But something shifted inside me. It wasn't suspicion yet. Just discomfort. Like standing in a room where the temperature quietly drops. That same week, I realized I no longer had access to one of our shared business accounts. Daniel brushed it off. New accountant suggested restructuring. Logical. Reasonable. Still, he didn't look at me when he said it. And then came the moment that would change everything. The accidental recording. I didn't know it then. But that single audio file would become the reason my husband's anniversary speech turned into the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't record Daniel on purpose. That's the strange part. There was no grand suspicion yet, no dramatic discovery, no moment where I thought my husband is hiding something. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was reorganizing tax folders in the home office while listening to a podcast through my phone. Daniel came home earlier than expected, talking loudly as he walked inside. I paused the podcast, but forgot to stop the voice memo app I'd opened earlier to record notes for myself. I didn't even realize it was still running. Daniel went into his office and closed the door halfway. A few seconds later, his tone changed. Lower. More relaxed. The kind of voice people use when they're speaking honestly. I remember hearing laughter. A woman's voice through speakerphone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but certain words pull your attention whether you want them to or not. Daniel said, "Yeah, she still thinks she helped build the company." My hands froze over the folders. The woman laughed softly. Daniel continued, amused. Emily handled small stuff early on, but legally, none of it's hers. That was intentional. Intentional. My chest tightened. I told myself I must be misunderstanding. Context mattered. Maybe they were discussing contracts or legal structure. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. After the anniversary, I'll transition everything cleanly. She'll be fine. I've set aside enough so she doesn't fight it. Fight what? The woman asked something I couldn't hear clearly. Daniel answered. No, she has no ownership rights. I made sure of that years ago. Because suddenly every small change over the past year rearranged itself into something darker. The closed conversations, the removed account access, the sudden independence in business decisions. I quietly picked up my phone and ended the recording. At the time, I didn't even listen back fully. I couldn't. My brain rejected what I'd heard. Instead, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Marriage doesn't collapse in one conversation. At least, that's what I believed then. That night, I watched Daniel eat dinner across from me like nothing had happened. He asked about groceries, mentioned traffic, complained about a supplier delay. Normal conversation. I kept waiting for guilt to show on his face. It never did. And something unsettling entered my thoughts. What if the version of our marriage I believed in only existed for me? Over the next 2 weeks, little moments started standing out. Moments I might have ignored before. At a company mixer, Daniel introduced me to a client as, "This is Emily, she keeps my life organized." Not wife. Not partner, organized. The client smiled politely and said, "You must be busy managing him." Daniel laughed and replied, "Oh, she's great at supporting roles." Supporting roles, I laughed too. Because socially, what else do you do? But inside, something fragile cracked. A few days later, I stopped by the office unexpectedly. I used to come often. Everyone knew me. But this time, the receptionist hesitated before letting me in. "I just need to check with Daniel," she said. Check with Daniel. I'd had keys to this place for years. When he finally appeared, Daniel looked surprised, not happy. "Everything okay?" he asked, guiding me toward the exit almost immediately. I told myself he was stressed, busy, successful. But as I walked out, I noticed something strange. My name was no longer on the internal staff board. Everyone else's titles were listed. Mine was gone. That evening, I listened to the recording again, this time from beginning to end. Every word felt heavier, every pause clearer, and I noticed something new. Near the end of the conversation, Daniel said, "Once the anniversary's done, it'll look natural. Timing matters. Timing matters. The anniversary wasn't just a celebration. It was a marker, a transition point." I sat alone in the kitchen replaying those words over and over. A cold realization settled in. My husband wasn't drifting away from me. He was planning an exit, and he wanted it to look clean, reasonable, fair. Like I had simply become unnecessary, I didn't confront him. People always ask why later. The truth. I needed to understand the full picture first. Emotion reacts. Observation reveals. So I watched. I listened more carefully. I stopped volunteering information about my feelings. And for the first time in our marriage, I began protecting myself instead of protecting us. Within days, Daniel suggested something casually over breakfast. "I think we should separate personal and business finances more clearly." He said it while scrolling through emails. Like it was administrative, normal. I nodded slowly. "What prompted that?" "Our advisors recommend it once companies scale." Advisors, plural, people I had never met, decisions made without me. He slid papers across the table. New account structures, adjusted payment systems, a monthly transfer labeled as household support. Support? The word hit differently now. I signed nothing. I simply said I'd review it later. Daniel didn't argue. He just smiled, relieved. That smile confirmed more than any document could. That night, I lay awake realizing something painful. I had trusted love to protect me legally, emotionally, and financially. Daniel had trusted paperwork. And paperwork always wins, unless you understand the timing. The anniversary invitations went out. I noticed something odd immediately. Almost all guests were from his professional world. Executives, partners, investors. only 2 of my close friends were invited. When I mentioned it, Daniel said, "It's more of a business celebration." Business? For our marriage? I smiled and agreed. But inside, a quiet certainty formed. This event wasn't for us. It was a performance, and I was part of the script, just not the author. 3 nights before the anniversary, Daniel fell asleep on the couch with his laptop open. I wasn't snooping. I went to close it so it wouldn't overheat. That's when a calendar notification popped up. Meeting, legal transition discussion, post-anniversary attached was a draft email. I didn't open documents. I didn't need to. The subject line alone told me enough. Asset protection finalization. My hands trembled slightly. Everything aligned. The recording, the distancing, the public event. He wasn't preparing to celebrate 10 years together. He was preparing to redefine our marriage publicly before ending it privately. And suddenly, I understood why humiliation would benefit him. If people saw me as dependent, then leaving me would look reasonable. That was the night I made a decision. I would attend the anniversary. I would smile. I would let him speak. And I would not interrupt him, because Daniel believed he controlled the narrative. He believed I didn't know. He believed I had nothing. But sitting alone in the dark living room, replaying that recording through my headphones, I realized something calm and steady. I didn't need revenge. I only needed truth, revealed at the right moment. And my husband was about to give me the perfect stage himself. I remember feeling strangely calm while getting ready that evening. Not happy, not nervous, just clear, like my emotions had stepped aside so my mind could finally see everything without distortion. I stood in front of the mirror wearing the navy dress Daniel once loved. I curled my hair the way he used to compliment. I even wore the bracelet he gave me during our 5th anniversary, back when gestures still felt genuine. From the outside, I looked like a woman celebrating her marriage. Inside, I felt like an observer walking into a story whose ending I already sensed. Daniel came upstairs adjusting his cufflinks. He stopped when he saw me. "Wow," he said. "You look amazing." The compliment landed differently now. I smiled anyway. "Big night," I replied. He nodded. "Yeah, it really is." Something about the way he said it felt layered, like we were talking about 2 completely different meanings. The restaurant was stunning, private rooftop space, city lights stretching behind glass walls, soft music, professional photographers already moving through the crowd. This wasn't an anniversary dinner. It was an event. People greeted Daniel immediately. Handshakes, back slaps, business laughter. I stood beside him, smiling politely while introductions happened faster than I could process. "This is Emily." No title, no warmth, just my name inserted between conversations about growth projections and expansion plans. One woman, tall, confident, early 40s, hugged Daniel longer than necessary before turning to me. "Oh, you must be Emily," she said. Must be. Her name was Lauren, operations consultant. I recognized the voice instantly, even before she spoke again. It was the woman from the recording. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed calm. She studied me carefully, almost measuring my reaction. I simply smiled and said, "Nice to finally meet you." Her expression flickered, just briefly, like she wasn't sure how much I knew. As the evening progressed, patterns became impossible to ignore. Daniel moved through the room like a public figure. I followed half a step behind. Conversations revolved around his success, his leadership, his vision. People praised him openly. One investor said loudly, "Daniel built something incredible from nothing." I waited, just a small acknowledgement. Instead, Daniel laughed modestly. "It's been a journey." Nothing else. No mention of partnership, no shared history. The erasure wasn't loud. It was subtle, repeated, systematic. At dinner, seating arrangements revealed even more. Daniel sat at the center table with executives. I was placed slightly off to the side between 2 employees I barely knew. One leaned toward me and whispered kindly, "You must be proud of everything he's accomplished." Accomplished? Alone, I nodded. "Yes, it's been a long road." And for the first time that night, anger flickered beneath my calm. Not explosive anger, something quieter. The realization that my marriage had already been rewritten publicly. I watched Daniel across the room laughing with Lauren. They shared private jokes, comfortable familiarity, professional closeness, maybe more. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I understood something deeply uncomfortable. I was no longer central in my husband's world. I was transitional, temporary. A chapter he planned to close gracefully. Halfway through dessert, the lights dimmed. A coordinator approached Daniel and handed him a microphone. Applause filled the room. My chest tightened. This was the moment. Daniel tapped the mic. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. His voice carried confidence, practiced, controlled. "This evening means a lot to me. 10 years of growth, lessons, and success." Success, not marriage, success. He spoke about his company's beginnings, the risks he took, the sacrifices he made. People nodded, completely engaged. Then his tone shifted. He smiled toward me. "And of course, none of this would have been possible without Emily." Applause started. Hope rose for half a second. Then he continued. "She's been my assistant in every sense of the word." Laughter exploded across the room. My ears rang. Assistant, again, but this time amplified through speakers. Public, permanent. He added casually, "Every successful man needs someone managing the background, right?" More laughter. Glasses clinked. And that's when I saw it. Relief on Daniel's face. Like this joke finalized something. Defined roles, established hierarchy, prepared witnesses. Heat rushed to my face, but I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't react at all. Because suddenly, the humiliation stopped hurting. It clarified. Daniel believed I was powerless. He believed embarrassment would keep me quiet. He believed the narrative was already secured. What he didn't know was that my phone sat calmly inside my purse. And inside that phone was his real voice. Unfiltered, unplanned, honest. Daniel raised his glass. "To 10 years, he said. Everyone stood. Champagne lifted, cameras flashing. And then he added one more line, the line that made my decision effortless. "Here's to moving forward into the next chapter." Next chapter. Not our next chapter, just his. The room cheered. People drank. Music began again. Daniel stepped off the stage smiling proudly, expecting gratitude, affection, admiration. Instead, I stood slowly from my chair. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart felt steady, clear, certain. For weeks I had wondered if I misunderstood everything, if maybe I was overreacting. But humiliation has a strange gift. It removes doubt. I walked toward him calmly. He leaned in to kiss my cheek for the photographers, and I whispered softly, "I think you forgot part of the story." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "Can I say a few words too?" Daniel hesitated, only for a second. Then he handed me the microphone, confident, relaxed, completely unaware, because he still believed this was his event, his narrative, his ending. He had no idea the real anniversary speech was about to begin. The microphone felt heavier than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Every conversation in the room softened into background noise as people turned toward me. Some smiled politely, expecting a loving wife's speech. Others looked mildly curious. Daniel stood beside me, one hand resting lightly on my back, a gesture meant to look supportive. Control disguised as affection. I took a slow breath, and for a moment, I simply looked around the room, at faces that had laughed seconds earlier, at employees who believed they understood our marriage, at Lauren, standing near the bar, suddenly very still. I smiled gently. "Hi, everyone," I said. "I didn't plan to speak tonight." A few people chuckled. "I thought this was just our anniversary," I continued. "But listening to Daniel, I realized tonight is also about stories, about how stories get told." Daniel shifted slightly beside me, not nervous yet, just impatient. I kept my tone calm, conversational, like I was sharing a memory. "When Daniel and I met, he didn't have investors, or offices, or staff. We worked at a kitchen table with unpaid bills stacked next to business plans." Several older employees nodded. They remembered. "I handled invoices, payroll, vendor contracts, honestly, anything that needed doing so his dream could survive." I paused. Not for drama, for truth. And I was proud of that role. The room quieted. Daniel smiled again, assuming this was admiration. Then I added softly, But recently, I learned something interesting about how our story has been told when I'm not in the room. The atmosphere shifted. Subtle tension. People leaned closer. Daniel's hand left my back. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Daniel's expression changed immediately. Confusion first, then concern. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I met his eyes calmly. "Finishing the story." I turned slightly toward the sound system operator. "Could you connect this for a moment?" The technician hesitated, glancing at Daniel. Daniel forced a laugh. Emily, maybe not, but the crowd's curiosity had already taken over. Someone said, "Let her speak." And that was enough. The phone connected. A faint static sound filled the speakers. My heart beat steadily, not fast, not scared. Just certain. I pressed play. Daniel's voice echoed through the rooftop. Clear, unmistakable. "Yeah, she still thinks she helped build the company." Silence hit the room instantly. No clinking glasses, no laughter, just listening. The recording continued. "Legally, none of it's hers, that was intentional." A murmur spread across the crowd. Daniel's face drained of color. He stepped toward me. "Emily, turn that off." I didn't move. The next line played. "After the anniversary, I'll transition everything cleanly. She'll be fine. I've set aside enough so she doesn't fight it." Gasps. Actual gasps. People looked between us, trying to reconcile the confident speaker from minutes earlier with the man exposed through his own words. Then Lauren's voice came through the speakers. Soft, familiar, asking a question. Daniel answered, "She has no ownership rights. I made sure of that years ago." The audio ended. I lowered the phone. The silence that followed felt enormous. No one laughed now. No one smiled. Employees exchanged looks. Investors frowned. One man slowly set his champagne glass down like he'd lost his appetite entirely. Daniel spoke quickly, voice tight. "This is completely out of context." I raised a hand gently. Not aggressive, just calm. "I didn't interrupt your speech," I said quietly. The room stayed with me. That surprised him. For the first time all evening, Daniel looked uncertain. Standing there, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt relief, because the burden of knowing alone was gone. Truth, once shared, becomes lighter. I faced the audience again. "I never wanted ownership of Daniel's success," I said. "I wanted partnership, respect, honesty." My voice stayed steady. "But tonight I learned something important." I glanced briefly at Daniel. Sometimes people rewrite history so leaving looks justified. No accusations, no yelling, just clarity. "I didn't play this recording to embarrass anyone," I continued. "I played it so I wouldn't continue being erased." The difference mattered. People understood it. One of Daniel's senior managers quietly shook his head in disbelief. Another avoided looking at Daniel entirely. Lauren stepped backward toward the exit. Daniel's composure cracked. "You recorded me without permission," he said sharply. I nodded. "Yes, accidentally." The room absorbed that. He searched for allies. None stepped forward. Because now the narrative had changed. This wasn't a dramatic wife causing a scene. This was a calm woman responding to deception. Power had shifted, not through volume, but through credibility. I handed the microphone back toward him. "I truly hope your next chapter brings you what you're looking for," I said gently. Then I added one final sentence. "And I'll be starting mine with the truth." I placed the microphone on the stand. No dramatic exit, no tears. I simply picked up my purse and walked toward the elevator. Behind me, conversations erupted. Questions, shock, whispers. The sound of Daniel trying to explain himself faded as the doors closed. For 10 years, I had stood beside him while he built a public identity. That night, I stepped away and let him stand alone inside it. The elevator ride down felt unreal. Not dramatic, not victorious, just quiet. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls, calm face, steady breathing, eyes clearer than they had been in months. I expected shaking hands, tears, panic. None came. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Space. Like a constant pressure I hadn't noticed for years had finally lifted. When the doors opened into the lobby, my phone immediately began vibrating. Text messages, calls, notifications stacking faster than I could read them. I ignored them all, except one. My best friend Hannah. Hannah, are you okay? I just heard what happened. I typed back I think I finally am. Outside, cool night air hit my face. I sat on a bench across the street from the restaurant and watched guests slowly leaving the building above. Small groups gathered, talking intensely. Phones out, expressions serious. The narrative Daniel had carefully built for years was unraveling in real time. And the strange part? I didn't feel satisfaction watching it. I felt clarity, because humiliation had never been the real injury. Erasure was. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me to answer. "Emily," a male voice said. "This is Mark Reynolds, one of Daniel's investors." I recognized the name immediately. He continued carefully. "I wanted to speak with you directly before assumptions spread." My stomach tightened. "Okay." There was a pause. Then he said something that changed everything again. "We were told you were never involved in company operations." I let out a slow breath. "That's not accurate." "I suspected as much," he replied. "Several early documents list you as operational contact." My heart skipped. Early documents, evidence I didn't even realize still mattered. Mark continued. "After hearing that recording tonight, some of us are reviewing how ownership and representation were structured." Ownership, representation. Words Daniel had worked hard to keep away from me. And suddenly, I understood something enormous. The recording didn't just expose emotional betrayal. It exposed potential business misrepresentation. Over the next 48 hours, information surfaced faster than I could process. Former employees reached out privately. One sent an old onboarding packet listing me as operations coordinator during the company's first expansion. Another forwarded emails where Daniel referred to me as co-founder support. Not legal ownership, but undeniable operational contribution. The picture became clear. Daniel hadn't merely minimized my role emotionally. He had gradually rewritten history professionally, removing references, changing titles, limiting visibility. Not illegal on its own, but deeply misleading, especially to investors who believed the company's origin story. On the third day, Daniel finally called. I answered. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then, "You blindsided me." His voice sounded exhausted, stripped of public confidence. I replied calmly. "I learned from the best." He exhaled sharply. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." I thought about that, carefully. "You introduced me as your assistant," I said. "You started the humiliation. I ended the confusion." Another long pause. His tone softened slightly. "We could have handled this privately." That sentence revealed everything. Privacy would have protected him. Public truth protected me. "I think," I said gently, "you already planned how to handle this privately." He didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "What do you want?" For years, I would have answered emotionally. That night, I answered honestly. Fair separation. Transparency, respect. No anger, no threats, just boundaries. And for the first time in our marriage, Daniel sounded unsure how to negotiate with me. 2 days later, one of Daniel's senior managers requested to meet. We sat at a quiet cafe. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I think you deserve to know," he said. He explained that the anniversary event wasn't originally Daniel's idea alone. It had been suggested during strategic planning meetings. The company was preparing a major expansion and potential acquisition interest. Investors wanted a clear leadership image, a simplified founder narrative, single decision maker, stable public identity. Daniel had leaned into that vision, gradually presenting himself as sole architect, removing complexity, including me. The anniversary celebration doubled as a relationship optics event, reinforcing his personal independence before upcoming negotiations. My chest felt strangely steady hearing this. Not shocked anymore, just confirmed. The humiliation wasn't spontaneous, it was strategic. Daniel had leaned into that vision, gradually presenting himself as sole architect, removing complexity, including me. The anniversary celebration doubled as a relationship optics event, reinforcing his personal independence before upcoming negotiations. My chest felt strangely steady hearing this. Not shocked anymore, just confirmed. The humiliation wasn't spontaneous, It was strategic. Driving home afterward, I realized something important. Daniel didn't wake up one day and become cruel. He became ambitious first, then protective of his success, then willing to reshape reality to maintain control. And somewhere along that path, our marriage stopped being a partnership and became a liability he planned to manage. Understanding that removed the last pieces of personal doubt. Lawyers entered the conversation soon after, not aggressive ones, practical ones. Documentation surfaced showing years of unpaid operational labor tied directly to company growth phases. Negotiations changed tone quickly. Daniel stopped speaking emotionally. He spoke carefully now, respectfully, because the balance had shifted, not through revenge, through visibility. One evening during negotiations, he said quietly, "I never thought you'd do something like that." I looked at him across the table. "I never thought I'd need to." And that was the truth. Within weeks, an agreement formed. No courtroom battles. No public scandal beyond the anniversary night. But outcomes changed dramatically from Daniel's original plan. Instead of a controlled exit allowance, I received a structured settlement acknowledging my contributions during formative years. Financial independence, clear separation, no narrative erasing me anymore. Justice didn't arrive loudly. It arrived in paperwork signed calmly across a conference table. 6 months after the anniversary, my life looked almost unrecognizable. Not because everything became perfect, but because everything finally became honest. I moved into a small townhouse across town. Nothing extravagant, just quiet, sunlight through kitchen windows, plants I remembered to water, furniture chosen without compromise. The first morning I woke up there, I noticed something strange. Silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. For years, I had lived inside constant emotional negotiation, adjusting moods, anticipating reactions, maintaining harmony. Without realizing it, I had been managing a relationship like another full-time job. Now there was space to hear my own thoughts again. Healing didn't happen dramatically. It showed up in ordinary moments. Grocery shopping without checking someone else's preferences, watching movies I liked, going to bed without waiting for late-night meetings to end. I started therapy, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand how I had slowly disappeared inside my own marriage. One session stayed with me. My therapist asked, "When did you first start minimizing yourself to keep peace?" The question followed me for days, because the truth wasn't that Daniel suddenly erased me. I had participated in small silences, accepted small dismissals, explained away small discomforts. Love had slowly turned into accommodation, and accommodation had turned into invisibility. Recognizing that wasn't painful. It was freeing, because it meant I could change the pattern moving forward. About 8 months after the anniversary, I received a message from someone I didn't expect. Lauren, the consultant from the recording. I stared at her name for several minutes before opening it. "Lauren, I owe you an apology. I didn't understand the full situation at first. I should have questioned things sooner. I read it twice, then 3 times. She continued. "For what it's worth, many people saw your strength that night. It changed how the company operates now." I didn't respond immediately, not out of anger, but because I realized I no longer needed closure from anyone connected to that world. Eventually, I replied politely, short, kind, detached. And when I put my phone down, I noticed something important. Her message didn't reopen wounds. It confirmed they had healed. I returned to professional work slowly, not inside Daniel's industry. I didn't want to compete with the past. Instead, I began consulting small startups, helping founders build operational systems the right way from the beginning. Ironically, the skills I'd spent years using quietly became my strongest asset. Clients appreciated my approach. Calm, organized, collaborative. One founder told me, "You see problems before they happen." I smiled when he said that, because I finally understood why. I had spent a decade learning how to notice subtle shifts before they turned into crises. People sometimes ask if I hate Daniel. I don't. Hatred keeps you emotionally tied to a chapter you've already finished. What I feel instead is distance. Clarity, acceptance. Our marriage wasn't entirely false. There were real moments of love, real teamwork, real dreams shared honestly at the beginning. But relationships can change quietly while both people pretend they haven't. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending too. Nearly a year after the anniversary, Daniel and I met one final time to finalize remaining paperwork. We sat across from each other in a neutral office. No tension, no hostility, just two people acknowledging an ending. He looked older somehow, less certain. "I didn't expect things to turn out like this," he said. I nodded. "Neither did I," he hesitated before adding, "You were always stronger than I realized." I considered that, then answered gently, "I was always the same person, you just stopped seeing me." He didn't argue, and for the first time, neither of us tried to rewrite the past. We signed the final documents, shook hands, and walked out separate doors. No dramatic goodbye, just closure. 1 year after the anniversary, I spent the evening differently. No crowd, no speeches, just dinner with friends who knew me, not my marriage, not my role, not my usefulness. We laughed, shared stories, talked about future plans instead of survival strategies. At one point, Hannah raised a glass and said, "To new chapters." I smiled quietly, because this time the phrase didn't feel like an ending disguised as celebration. It felt real. What surprised me most wasn't independence. It was self-trust. I no longer ignored discomfort. I no longer explained away disrespect. And I no longer believed love required shrinking myself. The anniversary that once marked humiliation became something else entirely. The day I stopped waiting to be acknowledged and acknowledged myself instead. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like calm truth spoken at the right moment. Sometimes it looks like walking away without anger. And sometimes it looks like rebuilding a life where respect isn't something you fight for, it's simply present. I didn't win because Daniel lost. I found peace because I stopped competing for a place in someone else's story. Now, when I think about that anniversary night, I don't remember the laughter or the humiliation. I remember the moment I realized I was no longer afraid of being seen clearly. And that changed everything. I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have played the recording publicly? Was that justice, or did it go too far? Do you believe Daniel ever truly loved me, or was the partnership always temporary once success arrived? And honestly, would you forgive someone after discovering they had quietly planned your exit from their life? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every story you share, and many of them become the conversations that inspire future episodes here on Marrianne Tales. Wherever you're listening from tonight, thank you for being here. And if this story stayed with you, there's another one waiting. Because sometimes healing begins when we realize we're not alone.